Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Fight for Our Freedom Radio. And I'm your host, Badbaby. And tonight we have with us Ken Rohla, and we are going to talk about radiation and what it does to our body and some solutions that he has come up with to heal yourself. We're going to talk about chemtrails, a lot of different things tonight. Hello.
Hi.
Guess what?
What?
I'm not seeing my guest in the room.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. I sent a email out to his staff, but I didn't send it till about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock this afternoon. But they did receive it. They sent me an email back saying it was being reviewed. So I don't know whether he might have and I don't have a home phone number for him. I should have gotten that lined up.
Oh, dear.
So I don't know what's going on. Maybe he isn't realizing. I looked on Facebook. He's not on Facebook, but I personally messaged him and said, "Where are you?" Oh, well, if he forgot or who knows if he had an emergency, we'll chit-chat for a little bit until see if he shows up, and if he doesn't, I'll just have to reschedule him.
Okay.
So what's going on in Arizona? You got some strange weather going on down there?
Yeah, we had a lot of rain recently, and now it's hot.
Really? Well, it's not hot up here in Michigan, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It is freezing up here.
Yeah, what's the wind chill factor now?
Well, today it was 10 below. It warmed up today. We went up to 15. Usually it's been about, like 4 and 6. So we warmed up a little bit today. But, the reason I asked you what's going on down there is I was looking at the earthquake map again today, and again in Oklahoma they had another 4.0. They're really having a lot of 4 factors in that Oklahoma area.
Right.
And I saw on also over in Japan, they're having off the coast of Japan, they're having 4 and 5 factors. But I saw on the news that they were saying that Texas has had 11 earthquakes in the last 2 weeks. They're shake, rattle, and rolling down there, and that it's very unusual. And I'm just wondering if this is from fracking, if it's HARP-related, or what the heck's going on with that stuff. But, I am seeing quite a bit of an increase. I haven't been checking out Yellowstone very much lately, so I'm going to have to get over there. I did watch one recording where they're saying that the cameras are being turned away from where the geysers are, and also that the snow around the geysers are melting a lot. I mean, it's just,
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, they don't want anybody to know what's going on. I heard the asphalt was melting during the summer on the road.
I'm wondering if he forgot that he had a show to do tonight. But, they booked him. They put it in his date book. He's in Florida. Does Florida have a different time zone from? I don't think they do they?
No, they have a different. No, they don't have a different time zone. They're in your time zone.
I didn't think so, because I said 10 p.m. Eastern. So either he forgot, or maybe he had an emergency. I apologize to everybody because he did confirm with me that he would come out here, and I'm sure when he realizes what happened, he'll either dial in or if he doesn't come on tonight, we'll just have to rebook him. But I did say to you guys that I would try to get Stuart Swidlow back on, and I got a hold of him the other day and asked him to come out, and he said he's booked until February, so he will be coming on the 1st of February, and I'm really looking forward to him and Janet coming back and sharing with us their adventures.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I was expecting to have a guest tonight, so I did not do any research.
Well, can you put on one of your oldies but goldies?
Yeah, I guess I could look up a past show. I just can't believe this. I really just can't believe it. But, you know what they say, God happens. There's all kinds of scuttlebutt going on the Internet right now about that shooting in Paris, and people that were there that were filming it with their iPhones from their apartments was saying it was staged.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
Well, there was one police officer that was laying on the sidewalk that they walked up and shot him in the head, and they said, now, how do you get shot in the head and nothing flies out, there's no blood, no, and, I looked at it very closely, and he's absolutely right. There was no spatter, no blood or anything, and then the other thing is they showed another guy who was supposed to have been the guy that got shot in the head. I don't know, because you couldn't tell, it was so far away, but he was sitting behind the car taking selfies with his cell phone.
Wow.
So who knows, half the stuff that goes on, you don't know whether it's true or not anymore.
Yeah, it's like they think we're fools, They think we're just going to go on, and most people do. That's the sad part about it. People don't question it. It's like they believe everything they see on TV.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, it's got to be true.
Absolutely, and they don't realize that the TVs are programming people to be drones, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Zombies or whatever, I believe it. I had a friend like that worked with me at Lionel that no matter, what I told her about how, the government and the news are hand in hand and it's propaganda, oh, my God, she would just go off on a tizzy. Oh, that's bull crap, and, anyone that believes our government's traitors to the people is out of their mind, and she really believes in the system.
Yeah. I was watching a movie today called The Equalizer, and with Denzel Washington. Have you heard of that movie? Well, it's, about the CIA operative who turns vigilante. And they portray these guys as, real heroes. But they're not.
Yeah.
They're evil. They're wicked.
Gee, I really screwed up by not getting a telephone number for Ken. But see, he had me booked this whole night through his staff.
Right.
He
could just be running late.
Yeah, I hate to open up a recording. I'm going to give him till quarter after, I guess. While we're talking, I'll go look something up. Got any preferences?
Well, I liked the show with the psychologist talking about the satanic ritual abuse.
Oh, Dr. Judy Byington.
Yeah, that was a good show.
I've got her phone number. but I'd hate to have her on and have him show up, you know.
Yeah.
I know if I called her, she'd come right on. Well.
Oh, wow. Well, let's wait about 15 minutes, and then if he doesn't come on, then give her a call.
I don't know. And then if he shows up because I left him a message and everything, I'd feel pretty bad.
Well, but he can't expect you to put everything on hold.
Yeah, well, a recording.
No. What time is it now?
Yeah, it's almost 1:15.
Yeah. Give him another 20 minutes. We can talk for another 20 minutes.
Yeah, I got to kind of look anyways because I don't label my shows. It won't let me label my shows. Everybody else can, but I can't.
Yeah. Well, that's par for the course, isn't it?
Oh, yes, whatever, Doesn't bother me. None of this stuff bothers me anymore. I'm pretty easygoing with all this stuff.
Right. Now, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about this movie.
Okay.
That I saw today. It was about
Hey, how about Paul Gunter when we talked about Fukushima, since we were going to talk about radiation?
Oh, yeah, that would be good.
Okay, I found that one.
All right. Great. The CIA operative was out against the Russian mob, right? Well, they're in bed with each other. These people. It's so. What they do is they make it look like.
Did you watch that on HBO?
No, it was on pay-per-view.
Oh, okay. Because I think I've seen the previews for that on HBO.
Yeah, they're going to have that on HBO. But there was one scene where they were laundering money, right? They're packaging money up. And this room is piled almost to the ceiling with bricks of money. And I was just thinking, wow, how these people make so much money, these organized crime folks. And that is how all this stuff is being financed. I know it.
I've had guests that are connected to the government that have said that all of these programs that are used with these microwaves and all that are black budgets that are being funneled through organized crime and drugs.
Yeah.
That's the protocol. That's where it's being raised from. Okay, well, I don't know. Let me check and see where I'm at on this recording.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to apologize to my listeners.
For our Freedom Radio, and I'm your host, Badbaby. And tonight we have.
Okay, I think I got to get through the bumper song here, and then we'll put this up. And I apologize. I don't know where Ken is tonight. I sent a message out to his staff, a reminder. Either they didn't remind him or he forgot. I don't know, but I will get back with him and rebook him on this. And tonight we will just listen to Paul Gunter when we were talking about Fukushima.
I'm going to start out with my opening bumper song.
Okay, I got to get through the bumper song on this recording, and then we will set this up and play this for you tonight. It's been a while. That's another person I should get back a hold of because I heard there's a lot of stuff going on over there with Fukushima lately.
I believe it.
I hear that they had another bad earthquake and there was a crack and that a bunch of more radioactive water leaked into the groundwater over there. And, they are so lying about everything they're doing and making people sick. And that's why I wanted to have Ken on tonight because he has solutions. I've been listening to some of his recordings, and he has solutions where we can protect ourselves from some of this and cleanse ourselves, and also the devices that we can make from stuff from Home Depot to clear the chemtrails out from a reverse tornado out from above our house. So, we'll get them out here.
Too. It's a mechanism that is based on the
for energy.
Computer glitch.
Okay, here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Gunter.
Okay, here we go.
Well, I'm still working on getting through that bumper song. Oh, my goodness, what a night, what a night. 20 minutes, I don't think he's going to show up.
No.
I apologize again, like I said to my listeners. We're going to have to run a little bit late tonight, probably about 20 minutes past midnight instead of midnight, but that's what you got to do when you have a little glitch, Again, I don't know what happened. Sent a reminder, said Happy New Year, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, it slipped his mind. So we will get him out here. I'll get a hold of him and make him feel like he ought to have been here. Oh, let's see. We're still working on the bumper song. I hate replaying a bumper song because it just doesn't come out right.
Yeah. Guess who Denzel Washington's character turned all that money over to? He had it busted, right?
Who?
Guess who got a hold of it?
Who does he turn it over to?
The FBI.
Yeah, that don't surprise me.
Is that a joke? Is that a joke?
Hey, I sent you a couple emails. Hold on, we got a guest from California. Let's see. Let me get you unmuted here. I'm trying. Welcome to the call, California.
Hey, how's it going?
And this isn't Ken, is it?
Hello?
Yes. Yes,
Hi.
Hello, is this Ken?
This is him. Hello.
Oh, we were just going to punt and go for the 3 points and start a recording.
Oh, well, I was wishing you would. Hello there.
Yes.
Well, I was just calling to say how they do.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, we're going to start a recording here because our guest did not show up tonight.
Okay, doke.
And we were going to, so I'm going to get back a hold of him. His name is Ken Rohl, and he has a website called Fresh and Alive. And we were going to talk about radiation, chemtrails, scalar energy, and how to keep yourself healthy from it.
Exactly, and I just wanted to call. I'm from Livermore, and the Livermore National Lab is over here, and I just wanted to call to talk a little bit about that.
Oh, okay. Well, do you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about it before we start this recording?
Well, I mean, we can talk about it, but I'd rather everybody hear my opinions. But I can talk to you. That's fine.
Okay. And do you mind if I ask you what your name is?
My name is Rondell Williams.
Okay. Well, welcome to the call. Isn't that something? My recording just crashed, you guys.
Well, that's a bummer. I mean, it's live. It happens. You know, recordings crash, and it's unfortunate. But yeah, I know you can get through it. You're my favorite.
I do a show with Kathy, who's on the line here too, and we do it on Mondays for the Lord. We used to do it every Monday, but we're doing every other week right now because I haven't been feeling well. But
hi, Kathy.
Hi.
How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well, thank you.
Bless you. You sound so sweet.
And we were playing a recording last week, the week before last, on the Bible codes. And they knocked me right out of the window, and because I was going to play part 2. And I could not get back. I was knocked off the Internet, and then it said I had no Internet connection.
Well, I tell you, that happened to me almost every day. Every time I go on the Internet, it's a jungle. I mean, sometimes you get through the muck, sometimes you hit a tree. That's what my grandpa said.
Oh, I love grandpa's and grandma's advice. I love it when elderly people come up with little wise cracks and
they're spiritual. They're something else. They just really know how the world works and how to just portray it in the words. That's just so humorous. I just love it.
Well, I got a question for you. Do you happen to have the History Channel?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Did you happen to see the special that was on last weekend, the End Days?
What special was that? I'm sorry.
It was the End Days.
Oh, yes. Yes, I did catch that. That was mighty good.
Yes. I was telling Kathy about it. My God, they couldn't have explained it any better.
Yeah, I'm telling you, they got the truth on that one. You know,
my heart just broke when they found the processing center for the elderly that they were loading up. That's exactly why they had them all get on the bus.
Exactly, and it's glad that people like you see the truth and see behind all the mummick and the mooch and exactly. That's what I like. I've
been out here for 10 years, honey, and they have called me cuckoo, crazy, loony-coo. Tell me when I try to help people with supplements, I'm selling my snake oil. I don't get anything for any of this.
You ain't got no snake oil, honey. You just
I ain't got no snake oil.
you just
I don't make no money for all the time that I put into these shows. I don't get a cent for any of it. I do it to try to help humanity. And I always tell you, they said Einstein was cuckoo too.
I know, and you just so. I mean, I just love you. Bring my spirits up. I'm just so happy listening to you.
Thanks, honey.
And you have such a cute giggle. I like it.
Well, let me check this recording now and see where I'm at.
Oh my goodness, Jesus!
I'm still working on the bumper song.
This
recording, I did this back in February 14th of 2014, and the guest that I was interviewing, his name is Paul Gunter. He is he's got 35 years in the nuclear reactor business, and so is a whistleblower on, what's going on with Fukushima. We talked about Fukushima and what's going on, but he says exactly what I've been saying for a long time. That's why I tell everybody to get the iodine tablets or get the iodine cream. Yes. Because if there's a nuclear reactor accident, you've got to use that right away. You can't use it 3 days after.
Exactly. And if you're really prepared, you got to do the Badbaby test, which gets the whole iodine it's faulty to 70%, but the Badbaby test is to 90%. It's a lot better, and I tell you, it's like making water. It's pure. It's clear. I mean, it's a lot better.
By federal law, they're supposed to have every home within a 20-mile radius the government was supposed to supply everything.
She's laughing at Kathy. I hear Kathy. She's laughing on the other end. Here.
Yeah, I hear.
What's she laughing at? That's not funny. Nuclear and the whole the test
Well,
of the iodine.
That the government isn't giving us the
that. I was laughing at my dog.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a dog too. He's real funny.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder what's so funny. I hear iodine test and I hear
whereabouts are you in California? Because I get a lot of my guests that call in from California, and when we talk about radiation, they tell me that they become sick when they're outside or in their swimming pool, if they get dizzy and nauseous, and this is radiation sickness is what they're describing.
Well, I tell you, I live near Livermore, California, which the Livermore National Lab is out there, and they do a lot of laser and nuclear tests, and there's a lot of strange activity if you really listen on and read the webs what's going on. They have machine guns from the front and the left and the right, and it's really just disturbing. But the main thing is I live closer to the area where it is, and I have a hard time breathing. I get in the shower, it's still hard time breathing.
Oh, you got to listen to my next show on Wednesday. I have a holistic healing show on Wednesdays, every other Wednesday, and that window is 46333. And we're going to talk about people. We've been talking about ways to breathe better and liquid supplements that help you for a hard time breathing. In fact, I've been having the same problem, and I think it has to do with the chemtrails, to tell you the truth.
Well, that sounds like the truth, and that sounds good, what you're saying.
One of the things I can tell you real quick is, you know how Vicks Vapor Rub opens up your nose and your sinuses and that? The reason it does is because I looked to see what was in it, and it's eucalyptus.
Well, you know what, methanol, gasoline, isopropyl alcohol, this will all open up your nose if you sniff it a little bit. Even cocaine, you sniff that a little bit.
Well, what you need to do is, if you've got a vaporizer or,
I got a vaporizer.
Take the Vicks Vapor Rub, I do, and put it under my nose at night, and then I take a Q-tip and I put a little bit up my nostril.
Oh, hell yeah.
Or just inside my nose. And that helps with my breathing. But I also have I'm sure you don't because you're in California, but I have a wood burner, and I keep a pot of water on my wood burner, and then I put eucalyptus oil in the water, and that kind of vaporizes the room.
Mm-hmm.
But you can even go buy fresh eucalyptus. And
is that Kathy?
No.
Is that Kathy? Oh, sorry, I got confused. You changed tones, and I thought you was Kathy. I'm sorry.
No, this is Badbaby.
Oh, I'm sorry. You got confused. I got an iPhone 4S, but I got a real question I really want to ask you. What is the purpose of humans?
What is the purpose of humans?
Yes.
Well, my perspective on it is that we come here to learn. That Earth is a lesson. We come here to learn, and if we don't learn what we're supposed to learn, and that basically is to love one another and help one another.
Love and help each other.
Yes. And, and basically we're not learning it because there's an awful lot of hatred and war in this planet.
Yes, I agree. And you really you helped me out, so I just want to thank you again. And how about we leave it with this? Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
What have 4 legs and says, hold the dough, hold the dough?
What? I don't know.
What has 4 legs and says, hold the dough, hold the dough?
I have no idea, honey.
2 black men waiting for an elevator.
Oh. Okay.
Hold the dough, hold the dough.
Oh, that's cute.
All right.
you guys. Well, we're going on a half an hour here, and I want to get this recording started. So I want to thank you for joining us. And like I said, join me on Wednesday night, and you'll learn a lot about detox.
Have a blessed day.
Holistic healing, and we'll help you out with that breathing problem.
Oh, thank you, and Baba Booey to you all.
Thank you, honey. You have a blessed night.
You too. Bye-bye now.
Why it happened. I mean, come on. We're living in the year 2000. Shouldn't we be able to contain things like this or know how to handle what we're dealing with?
Nuclear power has always been out of control. It's been a myth that the peaceful atom came about. It was always a bomb. Most people don't realize that in the beginning, it was all about making nuclear weapons, and we saw that in the initial atomic pile in Chicago in 1942, which was the first critical reaction was for the atomic bomb that was exploded at Trinity in Alamogordo in July of 1945, and ultimately the duplication of that process for the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And by 1952, we've seen the documentation where the Atomic Energy Commission of the United States made an offer to the corporate industrial superstructure of the United States, like groups like Monsanto, General Electric, Union Carbide, Dow Chemical, Detroit Edison, Union Electric. All these corporations were invited in 1952 to demonstrate that in the process of generating materials, plutonium, enriched uranium for nuclear weapons, the byproduct heat, the heat associated with developing nuclear weapons had a purpose to co-generate electricity. And that was the initial offer that we saw by contracts between government and industry in 1952, that the attendant processes of making nuclear weapons could be used to co-generate electricity. That in turn turned out to be the government motto that President Eisenhower trotted out in 1953 as the peaceful atom. But the peaceful atom was always a bomb, and that has proved true now with the expansion of nuclear technology. The civilian technology is the fundamental building block for nuclear weapons, and that's now brought us into the 21st century, luckily without destroying ourselves in all-out nuclear war, but we're slowly cooking ourselves in the radioactivity that's attendant both in the routine operation, the nuclear waste, and inevitably these nuclear accidents like 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. And the next one, we don't know what name it will have or where it will be, but most certainly as these nuclear power plants age, they become more vulnerable, not less, to severe accidents.
How old was Fukushima?
Fukushima Daiichi came online in around 1971, 72. So it was, just over. It was approaching 40 years when it had its accident. These were the early General Electric boiling water reactors. Essentially, these are the Model Ts of the nuclear industry. But it was a General Electric Mark I boiling water reactor for units 1 through 5, and then a Mark II reactor, a boiling water reactor for unit 6.
You call it the Model T. Does that mean that it should have been shut down?
These reactors are, well, particularly the Mark I's, the documentation is there to show that even early on in 1972, we see documentation where the Atomic Energy Commission, which is the predecessor of our Nuclear Regulatory Commission today, the AEC, there were top safety officials like Dr. Stephen Anauer, who said in September of 1972, we should discontinue use of these GE reactors and not build any more of them. And basically citing the fact that the GE Mark I boiling water reactor has a very small containment system. 1/6 the size of the containment structure for, say, 3 Mile Island.
So we did continue building the same one, so didn't we?
After Dr. Anauer warned that these were vulnerable to failure, the Atomic Energy Commission and then the Nuclear Regulatory Commission went on and licensed 16 more Mark I's to be constructed, and then 9 more Mark II's. So we have a clear paper trail, where the Atomic Energy Commission and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission knew that the containments were too small in the event of a severe accident, and even as early as 1985, we had top NRC safety officials like Harold Denton being on record as saying there was a 90% chance of failure of a GE Mark I containment if faced by a severe accident. And those warnings were ignored repeatedly until ultimately on March 11th, 2011, the GE Mark I reactor had a field test of its containment under severe accident conditions, and we saw 100% failure rates for units 1, 2, and 3, which were the 3 of the 6 reactors that were operating on March 11, 2011. The writing has been on the wall. We have 31 of these reactors here in the United States, operating outside of Chicago, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Boston, major population centers. We have these same Fukushima-style reactors that we know, if faced by that, however remote it is, the severe accident, if these reactors are challenged, these are our American Chernobyls. They will be the next Fukushimas, but they will have a U.S. city on, the epitaph.
Wow, that's scary. That is very scary.
It's very foolish, is what it is. I mean, we've got clear alternatives, but the issue.
It all has to do with money.
It has to do with power, and control, centralized control. I mean, the last thing that this centralized electric grid system wants is to see distributed power on your roof, where communities rather than corporations are generating electricity, where co-ops are putting together rooftop by rooftop by rooftop solar panels, then interconnect independent energy generation, as opposed to centralized control that is, right there to supersede democratic structure, that imposes national sacrifice zones, in the form of either emergency planning or ultimately nuclear waste sacrifice zones. This is the struggle that we currently face in the 21st century, the holdover of the atomic age as this technology increasingly becomes extinct. But all along we've known that electricity is the fleeting byproduct of the nuclear industry. The real legacy, the lasting product is ultimately contaminated land and water and the nuclear waste that will last generations to come without 1 watt of electricity, only the liability.
Take us through what happened with Fukushima. Why did the reactors fail?
Basically what happened was that we saw an extreme event of nature with the earthquake, very high magnitude on the Richter scale, 9 magnitude, that created a tsunami that then brought a tremendous wave of water all along the eastern seaboard of Japan, and but ultimately what we have is that we had a triple catastrophe: the earthquake, the tsunami, and then the nuclear catastrophe. And I think that what is important to understand, first of all, is that despite the fact that this was a natural catastrophe that initiated Fukushima Daiichi nuclear catastrophe, it was a man-made disaster. And I mean to say that because the Japanese Diet, the Japanese equivalent to our Congress, convened an investigation of the Fukushima Daiichi accident, and it was their conclusion that it was a man-made disaster created by the collusion of government, regulator, and industry, Tokyo Electric Power Company, because fundamentally the accident that happened on March 11th, 2011 was set up by this collusion of government and regulator and industry back in the very beginning of the construction of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, when Tokyo Electric Power Company, in the original siting for the construction of Fukushima Daiichi, put out a model that the largest tsunami possible would only be 10 feet tall. And using that model, they were approved to first of all, in the very first stage of construction of Fukushima Daiichi, was to remove 80 feet of the natural seawall to put the reactors on a grade that was 80 feet lower than the natural seawall. So they removed the natural tsunami barrier in order to build Fukushima Daiichi 1 through 4, where they could have ease of access to the construction site and lower the cost of pumping water at this lower elevation for cooling the nuclear power stations. So when the tsunami came in on March 11th, it wasn't 10 feet tall. It was 50 feet tall. And it swept over the Fukushima Daiichi reactor site, probably which had already been damaged by the earthquake. Clearly, the first effect of the earthquake was to knock out all of the transmission of off-site electric power into these nuclear power stations. All just like here in the United States, 100% of the power for all safety systems comes from off-site electrical grid. It's not generated by the reactors themselves. They rely upon the electrical grid for 100% of their safety-related power. So the earthquake brought down the transmission lines, and that, in fact, caused an automatic shutdown of all 6 reactors there at Fukushima Daiichi. And by all accounts, right now, all 6 reactors, the 3 that were operating shut down. The other 3 were already shut down for refueling and maintenance. So units 1, 2, and 3 were at 100% power when the tsunami came in. And, I should say they had automatically scrammed, and they were in this process of cool down. You know, it's important to understand that when a nuclear power plant shuts down, it does not mean that it's safe. You have tremendous amounts of heat that remain in the reactor core that must be removed, and it can take days for this heat to be brought into cold shutdown. So when the reactors shut down, and when they lost the off-site electrical power, they were then reliant upon emergency on-site power, primarily diesel generators, that then kicked in to provide a power supply to a subset, a priority subset of emergency systems, cooling water, control, instrumentation, monitoring, emergency backup systems. But clearly they lost a margin of safety when the electrical grid went down. Then when the tidal wave came in, the emergency diesel generators at Fukushima Daiichi were all below grade, and the tsunami was able to break down the doors of in the turbine halls and entered through various doorways and ultimately flooded the diesel generators. And so within hours, the emergency backup battery systems were beginning to be depleted. So you have this, this succession of various grades of degradation of safety. When the grid goes down, you get marked down for your safety. When the emergency diesel generators go down, then the emergency backup battery systems come in. But again, you've lowered your safety walls, and ultimately within hours, the batteries were depleted. And they were, the Tokyo Electric Power workers were, they were going out and they were wiring systems into auto batteries that they had been scavenging out of the parking lots to try to keep instrumentation going. And eventually all these systems failed to cool the tremendous amount of heat that was left over. Like when you take a frying pan out of the oven, it doesn't cool immediately. But, you've got a mega, wattage of heat that ultimately caused the fuel to overheat. The uranium oxide fuel pellets swell up and burst out of their tubular cladding. And, for nuclear power, these nuclear fuel assemblies are encased in tubes that are made of zirconium, and then these zirconium tubes, rods, are then put into assemblies, and then those make up the reactor core. Zirconium, if you powder it, it's what's in flash bulbs. Zirconium is while it's a very strong alloy, so you can make very thin-walled tubes of it. It's fundamentally, in its powder form, an explosive. Zirconium is frequently used in high explosives, and this is the makeup of the nuclear tubes that encase the uranium-235 that's used for the fissioning process. So when the heat removal system broke down at Fukushima, the uranium began to overheat and ultimately started to melt the zirconium cladding. And when zirconium catches fire, it elementally separates a water-saturated atmosphere. So water then becomes an atmosphere of hydrogen and oxygen, a highly explosive atmosphere. And so you had the meltdown where the uranium turned into a lava-like formation that began to flow. At the same time, you had the generation of a hydrogen and oxygen atmosphere that was looking for a spark. And so what we saw on March 12th was the explosion, and then again on the 14th we saw multiple explosions. These were the what they call an exothermic reactions from the meltdowns, and this is the fundamental flaw in nuclear power, that they have this as they break down, they generate an ever more inherently dangerous consequence. And so we saw these multiple explosions as a result of the hydrogen detonations that were going on at the same time that the reactors were melting down.
But when it explodes like that, that releases radiation into our atmosphere, correct?
These were ultimately the releases that were both pressure, temperature, hydrogen gas, all saturated with radioactivity. And we're still in the dark about all the details. Tokyo Electric Power Company, the nuclear industry in Japan, as the nuclear industry around the world, is very secretive. And the governments are really captured agencies without any real authority or enforcement over the nuclear industry. This is a rogue industry, basically. Japan, Russia, France, the United States, they're all the same. They operate almost autonomously from the regulation and oversight of the governments. In fact, they are authorities unto themselves, and ultimately connected to the military aspect of nuclear technology. But that's clearly demonstrated by what's happened now in the aftermath of Fukushima. When they lose control of the atomic reaction, when they fail to contain radioactivity, the first thing they'd seek to do is to contain information. So we're still trying to gain transparency into what happened at what's going on today at Fukushima Daiichi. You know, we don't know. Tokyo Electric Power Company, they may not even know themselves where those molten cores are for units 1, 2, and 3. You know, they've escaped the reactor vessel and escaped through the reactor containment, and in fact may be burning through the concrete basement and into the earth in an uncontrolled release that is so radioactive right now that Tokyo Electric Power Company cannot even get robotics in to measure, you know, the actual status of these reactor cores. So, you know,
if it does burn into the earth, what happens?
Well, we just get more. You know, it means that there'll be, you know, less opportunity to try to contain the release of radioactivity. You know, right now we see, you know, we're almost 3 years now from the nuclear accident with multiple reactors that have failed containment, and we have uncontrolled radiation releases that are ongoing now through groundwater releases that are flowing hundreds of tons a day into the Pacific Ocean. We have, you know, more than 1,000 tanks. This incredible tank farm that has been erected after the accident to try to contain reprocessed cooling water that's being poured onto this molten reactor catastrophe. But the cleanup systems have repeatedly broken down, and these tank farms are incredibly radioactive themselves. And because they were hastily constructed, these tanks are falling apart. And they too are leaking radioactive contents into the Pacific Ocean. Then we have the ongoing radioactive releases into the atmosphere as these units are steaming radioactive contents, you know, essentially from the reactor cores that are working their way into the Earth.
And didn't we just have an explosion not too long ago from there?
We've seen steam releases. We've not seen, you know, any explosions since the March 15th, 2011. So, you know, but we remain concerned that you know, you could have a recriticality at Fukushima. You know, we're all on pins and needles right now with the idea that another major earthquake and tsunami, you know, however remote that is, would redouble the catastrophe at Fukushima Daiichi. You know, we have this other unit, Unit 4, which was damaged by an explosion, but the Unit 4 was shut down at the time of the accident and was refueling, and so they had removed the entire reactor core out of the vessel, the reactor vessel, and had put it into a storage pond that sits 6 to 10 stories up in the reactor attic. So it's up outside of the containment structure, literally on the roof in a swimming pool. And when Unit 3 had its accident and the hydrogen generation, because Unit 3 and Unit 4 shared a common venting system, hydrogen gas from Unit 3 got into Unit 4 and caused an explosion there, and severely damaged the reactor building, and has caused this fuel pool of nuclear waste literally as high as a 10-story building, to shift, to lean. And so you now literally have the leaning tower of Fukushima there at Unit 4. Tokyo Electric Power Company has, performed an engineering feat to try to shore up this leaning tower to make sure that it doesn't topple. And if it were to topple, then you would have all that hundreds of tons of nuclear waste, zirconium included, would then collapse into an open atmospheric atomic fire that would it raises significant concerns, certainly for all of Japan and the Pacific region, but even for the Northern Hemisphere. So
if it was to topple, how would this affect the West Coast?
Well, we've seen atmospheric deposition of radioactivity in Iceland from Fukushima, coming, across Alaska, Canada, the United States, but it, again, it's the entire Northern Hemisphere that we're talking about. Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California, these are the early warning sites, but the consequences would be far-reaching both in terms of distance and time. And there's a tremendous amount of radioactivity still at Fukushima that will need to be safeguarded for decades. Right now, they don't have that accident under control. There's still loads of uncertainty, incredible vulnerability, a patchwork of technology used to try to bring these uncontrolled releases of radioactivity into some kind of management. But, we have...
If this is going to affect the whole world, why is not the whole world getting involved?
Well, part of the problem is the fact that Japan is exercising its rights to being a sovereign country. So, they have chosen to
ask for help?
To basically say we'll solve the problem ourselves. And so, what potentially has international consequence still is being controlled by a national interest. And who knows? I think that part of that is the culture of Japan, which is historically known to be closed. Although, with all due respect, Japan has opened considerably, but only since, the 19th century. But there's still holdovers. So they've resisted actual international aid from the United Nations and from even there is, certainly there is the global nuclear industry has some concerns and has, come in, but, the nuclear industry has no allegiance to any particular nationality. So, the global nuclear conglomerate is holds sway not only over Tokyo, but Moscow, Paris, Washington, D.C., London, Brussels. We should be aware that the nuclear industry is its self-interest. It comes first. and this is borne out time and time again, where governments are kept in the dark. If you look at the accident at 3 Mile Island, Metropolitan Edison basically withheld information from not only the state of Pennsylvania but the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission for days, in terms of not telling the truth about the meltdown that was ongoing within hours of that accident on March 28, 1979. But it wasn't until days later that the governor of Pennsylvania, Richard Thornburg, decided that he couldn't trust the utility anymore and advised that pregnant women and preschool children within 5 miles of the 3 Mile Island nuclear power station to voluntarily evacuate. And, that was a target population of about 4,000 women and preschool children. But in response, the fact that the industry is, not trusted, even by public, more than 200,000 people spontaneously evacuated out to 25 miles in the aftermath. And then, following the April 26th, 1986 meltdown at Chernobyl, Moscow withheld information from its own people that Chernobyl was melting down. And so, you had people marching through the streets of Kiev on March 1st, children parading under the, while just miles away, the Chernobyl nuclear power stations were burning, and people didn't know. It wasn't until a nuclear power plant, the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden, more than 1,000, close to 2,000 miles away. Well, I think it was about 1,500 miles. They picked up a radioactive signature that they identified was not coming from their nuclear power plant, and they blew the whistle on the Chernobyl nuclear accident. But again, the information is part of the meltdown when any of these nuclear power stations begin to fail.
What exactly does it do to pregnant women and children? Explain that to the audience.
Well, the concern is that if you look at the scientific studies, for example, the biological effects of ionizing radiation, we're now in the 7th reporting period of this international study. They've established that there is no safe dose for being exposed to radiation. And so as a consequence, the most vulnerable of our population, pregnant women, first trimester fetuses, when the female inhales radioactive gas or ingests radioactive materials, that transmits into the blood and then basically passes the placenta barrier. So because the fetus is the fastest growing cells, the radioactivity will migrate to those cells through the blood, and So the most vulnerable of our population are developing fetuses, and this is basically, we know this from fundamental radiation studies. That's why pregnant women are not.
Pictures of the Chernobyl accident.
Yeah, and exposure to radiation is a particular threat, but what we're seeing from the Chernobyl experience is that the effects are particularly pronounced on pregnant, the pregnant women who have the fetus is developing, and then ultimately the newborns. For example, let's just look at one particular isotope, cesium-137, which is released from these meltdowns: 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima. But particularly at Chernobyl, we've now seen through medical studies by Yuri and Galita Mandashevsky, pediatric cardiologists, who, we know, for example, that cesium will concentrate in muscle tissue, and so newborns and children will concentrate radioactive cesium in the heart. You're a very strong muscle in humans, and as a result of cesium intoxication, we know that radioactive cesium will cause lesions in heart muscle as in other muscles, but as a result, we're seeing what's called cardiomyopathy in children. It's called Chernobyl heart, but we're seeing where a whole host of maladies now, as populations are being forced to live in radioactive contaminated zones around Chernobyl, as from now 26 years ago, that the radioactivity works its way into the muscle tissue, works its way through a whole host of access into human biology, and we're seeing, for example, around Chernobyl, we're seeing spontaneous abortions. We're seeing an increase in mortality in the number of ill and feeble newborns. We're seeing genetic defects, congenital malformations, increase in incidence of cancer, impaired mental development, increases in psychiatric diseases, immune deficiency, hormonal imbalances, again, the increase in cardiovascular maladies.
And you're seeing this in the United States?
No, we're seeing this primarily in southern Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, from the populations that are forced to live in contaminated zones around the Chernobyl accident. But, these are the kinds of maladies, though, that don't necessarily show up immediately after an accident. It takes years, even, decades, but it's showing up now in, the children and the children's children of the generation that was there in 1986. It takes generations for the people didn't drop dead immediately after 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl or Fukushima. It doesn't mean that there is no impact or that there will be no impact in the future. Cancer is a byproduct. Cancer is a result of a nuclear accident, but it can take years and decades before, and even it can show up in generations that were not directly there during the accident. But children of the workers, children of the parents who evacuated, it can even skip generations and turn up in the children of children in terms of genetic defects or birth defects.
Wow, that's scary. And I have heard, I don't know how true this is, but I have heard that it is affecting pregnant women in the west coast of the United States.
At this point, we've not seen any evidence that there's an increased risk. I'm not saying that, I don't want to spread fear.
What about the fish? All the fish in the ocean that are coming up burned and dead. And
again, we have seen incidents of where starfish, for example, massive kill-offs on the western coast. But, again, right now we don't have any conclusive evidence that those those die-offs are the result of Fukushima radioactivity on our western coast. It remains a concern. We do have, for example, the University of California, Long Beach is conducting a radiological survey in marine life, specifically kelp forests along the west coast, California and Washington, and they're monitoring kelp forests for this anticipated radioactive plume from Fukushima to arrive on the west coast. And so we see some limited sampling. I think they have 35 sampling stations along the western coast. That's not enough. And certainly kelp is a important marine life that we need to be monitoring, but there are other marine life needs to be monitored as well. Fish populations. We have seen studies by Stanford University and Stony Brook that indicate that bluefin tuna, which spawn off the east coast of Fukushima and then migrate over the northern Pacific, are arriving in feeding grounds off the coast of California with elevated cesium-137 and 134 isotopes. These are trace elements of radioactive contamination in the muscle of the bluefin tuna, which is a sport fish that is consumed, and again, we're now still we're arriving at the third year, the third migration of these bluefin tuna, and we're continuing to see the radioactive contamination. These are all harbingers of the radioactive contamination that continues to build as long as this accident goes uncontrolled. And right now we don't see an end to the release of the radioactive contamination from this nuclear accident.
It is still out of control. How much radioactive water are they still dumping into the ocean?
They say that it's, if you add it up, it's about, it's hundreds of tons a day.
Wow.
We don't really know, and it's, it depends on how bad the leaks are. So it's not that kind of information is not reliable right now. What we do know is the release is uncontrolled. It's coming from groundwater, moving off of the mountains behind Fukushima, under the radioactive wreckage where it's contaminated, and then it migrates by groundwater into the ocean. Again, it's coming from the periodic leaks from this tank farm, 1,000 tanks, millions of gallons of radioactive water, and it's uncontrolled. They have various plans, but basically to freeze the ground, to establish a dam of frozen earth to try to stanch the flow of radioactive water into the ocean. But when you make a dam, the radioactive water will simply build up behind the dam and ultimately overflow. And that's really what we're seeing at Fukushima today. Is this damming effect. It's basically even making the reactor site itself, the wreckage itself, unstable as the ground becomes more and more saturated behind the dam under the wreckage.
So what should people that are in my audience tonight that are living on the West Coast do right now to safeguard themselves from ingesting the radiation?
Well, we basically our understanding. I'm sorry?
I said obviously avoid eating the tuna.
Yeah, it's bluefin tuna is, again, we've seen trace contamination has been documented because you have this, it's a migrating fish from Japan throughout the Pacific. I think that vigilance is what is important right now. We cannot fully rely upon our government to be vigilant for us because there is clear collusion between government, regulator, and industry throughout the global nuclear industry. So there, we have captured regulators, which I would argue includes the Nuclear Regulatory Commission here in the United States and the Environmental Protection Agency and the Food and Drug Administration. We've not been satisfied with the response of government for example, monitoring seafood, monitoring the atmosphere, monitoring rain, these transportation mechanisms that can bring Fukushima radiation into our lives. And so one thing is to be, we get calls periodically from folks on the West Coast that are getting radiation monitors, and they're monitoring rain, for example, to basically gather a base reading of what's in the rainfall, what's the natural background, and perhaps anticipating being able to monitor radioactive fallout from increased releases from Fukushima.
Yeah, I have had guests that have been on my show, other shows, not even talking about Fukushima, and they have typed into my chat room that they are getting nauseous, and even their neighbors are, when they're outside for long periods of time. They get dizzy, nauseous. Are these some of the effects that they're getting from the atmosphere?
Again, I don't think that we can assign symptoms like nausea or dizziness to Fukushima, in all honesty. But clearly nausea and dizziness, we have we have a lot of accounts from people that were living downwind from 3 Mile Island that experienced a reddening of the skin. It's called erythema, where if you, for example, if you get a radiation treatment for cancer, often the exposure area will turn red. The skin will turn red, and people living in proximity to 3 Mile Island in the days following the 1979 accident, they came inside and they were sunburned. It looked like sunburn. We had people, in 3 Mile, following the 3 Mile Island accident, experiencing loss of hair, nausea, and exhaustion from just being outside. There are lots of anecdotal stories like that in the days following the 3 Mile Island accident. But again, at that time, there wasn't any radiation monitoring going on. The people themselves were the radiation dosimetry, and so their symptoms indicated that they were being exposed. We're coming up on the 35th anniversary of 3 Mile Island this March 28th, and there's just remarkable accounts of what people experienced there in Pennsylvania. One story, for example, just a few miles away from 3 Mile Island, we have an account of a dentist who, in his office, kept radiography film for his dental x-rays, and he kept it in a vault, but when he went in after the 3 Mile Island accident to pull his these x-ray films, he found that they were fogged and streaked as being exposed to not X-ray, but radiation. And so you have these stories that indicate that, the actual effects are hidden from us because radiation is invisible.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, there were these stories of symptoms, of evidence that showed that a radioactive plume did pass that way. And it's really the same for the West Coast, in that, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency actually shut down radiation monitors in the days following the Fukushima Daiichi accident in Japan and never put them back into operation. That's
very suspect.
Very suspect. But it's that kind of the fact that we don't have that kind of vigilance from our own government for this international incident. Again, people are going to be the dosimetry, but it's going to be difficult to ascribe a source to any particular malady.
I'm sure you're familiar with the lawsuit that's going on with the naval aircraft carrier that went over there, and all those soldiers are becoming very ill now.
Yeah, we're aware that U.S. naval personnel on the USS Ronald Reagan, which is part of the 7th Fleet, they were off the coast of Japan during the Fukushima Daiichi accident on March 11, 2011. And I believe right now it's about 79 sailors have filed a lawsuit against Tokyo Electric Power Company for failure to accurately report, even failure to disclose known material fact about the release of radioactivity. We've heard some stories from sailors directly that, in fact, the USS Ronald Reagan was just a few miles off the coast of Japan, off Fukushima Daiichi, possibly there to lay power cable from the Ronald Reagan in an attempt to restore power to the damaged reactors, to repower their cooling systems. That's not anything official, but again, these are accounts from sailors that they could see the power plant from the deck of the USS Ronald Reagan, and they were flying routine helicopter sorties over the damaged reactors, and coming back. These helicopters are coming back contaminated, and in fact, the decks of the USS Ronald Reagan were contaminated, and it is also apparent that they were close enough to the coastal water of Fukushima Daiichi that the desalination plants on board the Ronald Reagan were taking in radioactive water, and that again, these accounts from sailors were that the water systems that the sailors were bathing, drinking, and eating with were contaminated, and so they had some increased exposure levels. They were experiencing nausea, dizziness, exhaustion, So we do see these these lawsuits moving forward right now.
Wow. They were actually bathing and using it to cook. Wow.
And drinking. These are the allegations. So what will happen to is our government helping these men, or I've seen the way they deny. No, these suits are going forward not through the U.S. Navy, but through individual sailors. So
are some of these sailors on disability now? How has this affected their health?
Again, they have claimed that a whole host of problems, medical problems that have befallen them as a result of their active duty there off the coast of Japan during the accident. They will basically continue to make disclosures as this case goes forward.
Let's talk about the reactors that we have in the United States. Now, I know we have one in California that is the same, and that what should happen if we have a major earthquake and the same thing happens here?
Well, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant was 6 units that were these General Electric Mark I and Mark II boiling water reactors. Again, these are 1960s vintage plants.
Outdated. Are ours outdated? Are we?
Well, we have 31 of these GE reactors that are virtually identical to the Fukushima-style plants, but they're east of the Mississippi River. Well, I should say Cooper is just on the Mississippi in Nebraska, but
which is on the New Madrid fault line.
Yeah, everybody's on the fault line. I think that we should understand that the science of seismology it's a developing science.
They do go everywhere.
Yeah, the fractures are everywhere, and some are more dominant seismology than others. Clearly, Diablo Canyon, for example, in San Luis Obispo, is on probably the most dynamic reactor earthquake fault line around the Pacific Rim, but Diablo Canyon is it's not like Fukushima. It is a light water reactor, but rather than a boiling water reactor, it's a pressurized water reactor, which is principally different by its containment design and also just how it operates. Although it is a fissioning reactor, you have where Fukushima and the GE boiling water reactors. When they say boiling water reactor, it means that the reactor boils water that then goes directly to the turbo generator and recycles back to the reactor through a condenser. So you have a primary loop that goes from the reactor out of the containment into the turbo generator and then through a condenser and then back into the reactor, into the containment. In these pressurized water reactors, like Diablo Canyon, the primary water system for the reactor stays within the containment, so that the water cycling off of the reactor is under so much pressure, hence being called a pressurized water reactor, that up to 2,000 pounds per square inch, that the water is not allowed to boil. So you can get water temperatures in Diablo Canyon up to 600 degrees Fahrenheit, and then that ultra pressurized, super heated water goes into what they call a steam generator, which the tubes from the primary coolant system that are coming off the reactor are intermingled and adjacent to another loop of tubes that come into the steam generator and then over to the turbo generator. So the steam generator is a heat transfer unit where the primary and the secondary water system, so they come together. So the primary heat transfer then actually boils the water in the secondary water system. So there's, supposedly under ideal design conditions, there's no contact outside of containment for the reactor-generated water and the water that then goes out into the turbo generator. But, these tubes, they leak. There is cross-contamination, and, there's wear and tear. They crack. They develop pinhole leaks, and ultimately they can break down. And you have that then, potential breach to the environment, to the atmosphere. So, but they're different designs. But clearly the big concern is that a significant earthquake at Diablo Canyon could cause that either a direct loss of coolant by breaking these tubes and coolant pipes, or by causing, just as what happened at Fukushima, the loss of off-site power, damaging the on-site emergency backup power, and ultimately the same loss of coolant accident that then can challenge the containment systems. And, an earthquake could even potentially damage the containment itself. So, these are the kinds of vulnerabilities we have at Diablo Canyon, and there probably are more than 7 earthquake faults, known earthquake faults, under the Diablo Canyon reactor site.
If there is a problem with a reactor site, what would a radius of safety be? I mean, that you said in Fukushima, I followed that when they first started evacuating. They went 50 miles, then they decided they made a mistake and there wasn't far enough, and so on and so forth. So how would that be for people who live around that area? What would be a safe zone for them?
Well, what we saw at Fukushima Daiichi, again, was the public was, and the government was left in the dark, and the utility withheld and falsified information in the development of the accident, and so there was a constant lag and failure to account for the accident. So when Fukushima began, at first they said there wasn't any concern, and then they called an evacuation for 2.5 miles, and eventually expanded out to 20 miles, and with and that was the concern for through the Japanese government. But they were telling people just to stay inside and not evacuate, but shelter in place. And so we have more than 150,000 children now that live in a contaminated radioactive zone that were never told to even evacuate. They were told to shelter in place. But you have recognizing the scope of these accidents, you had U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission Chair Gregory Yasko, who advised U.S. nationals through our U.S. Embassy in Japan to evacuate out to 50 miles, principally because of concerns of the collapse of these nuclear waste ponds, as I mentioned, which sit perched in the reactor attic of these buildings, of these reactor buildings. And so the scope, though, is global. You can't evacuate countries. And ultimately, these reactor accident can have consequences far, far beyond any of the planning. The planning for an emergency, for a nuclear catastrophe, is arbitrary. Once you have an uncontrolled release into the atmosphere, into the water, evacuation and emergency planning becomes irrelevant.
The closer people are the ones that go first, but eventually all of us are going to be affected.
The consequences are far-reaching, not only in distance but time.
How long, Paul, will it take our planet to recover from this?
The recovery begins when the accident can be contained.
And it's
hard to have a recovery scope if we have not brought that accident to a halt. And as long as we have the failure to contain the radioactivity right now, 3 years into this accident, there is no control to contain the radioactive release. So it's ongoing. Whether we can achieve containment is a question. And that, even after containment, there's always the concern that, as you have at Chernobyl, that the event could reignite. And so recovery is open question. The only relevant protection is prevention. And that's why we advocate for the immediate shutdown of nuclear power plants.
What can we do to help the shutdown of nuclear power plants?
The principal action right now is education, and education about the consequence of not only nuclear accidents but routine radioactive operations. I think we should ultimately. The radioactivity generated in these nuclear power plants escapes in the nuclear waste. There is no long-term management for nuclear waste. We don't know what to do with it. The best option right now is to bury it underground, which is no better than sweeping it under the environmental rug. To hide it in the ground for millions of years threat beyond our generation, but imposes the hazard on future generations, which will not get 1 watt of benefit, but all of the liability.
So we see pictures of frogs with 2 heads and turtles with 2 heads and.
You know, we've seen. You know, if you go to our site Beyond Nuclear, you'll be able to on the commemoration of the 35th anniversary of the 3 Mile Island accident, March 28th, 2014. We will have a publication that begins to, you know, look at the consequence of 3 Mile Island. You know, we're told by the nuclear industry that there is no consequence from 3 Mile Island. Nobody was injured. Nothing happened. But we're seeing the mutations. We're seeing the cancers and leukemias that are a response of the threat that and the risks that come with the release of radioactivity. And you know, I think that the big concern is that the effects of radiation exposure may not be as obvious as a 2-headed cow, though they exist at 3 Mile, you know, in the aftermath of 3 Mile Island. You know, we've seen the calves that are deformed. We've seen increased incidents, and we've heard these accounts through the veterinarians in the 3 Mile Island area. But you know, what we're seeing around Chernobyl in the routine and ongoing exposures there is just a failure to thrive. You know, children who are exhausted, who don't have enough energy to play. It's more insidious than something as obvious as these gross mutations. But the whole idea of Chernobyl heart, that the muscle tissue can become so intoxicated with radioactive cesium that it's weakened and the circulatory systems are weakened. So it's not necessarily going to be as obvious as a 2-headed frog.
Yeah. Is there any way that someone, that has been exposed can try to detoxify their body with this, or is it?
We've heard of research that is still in the early stages. The most relevant protection is to not get the exposure.
Yeah. I know that they did hand out the iodine pills.
Yeah, potassium iodide. Again, it prevents the uptake of radioactive iodine to the thyroid. But the potassium iodide, you have to take it hours before the exposure, so the iodine
after the fact is no good.
Yeah, what you're doing is you're saturating the thyroid gland with inert iodine, so that it won't take up the radioactive iodine. So you need, this is what we've seen as a result of Chernobyl. Lots of kids in Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia were to iodine-131 and never given the thyroid blocker. But children in Poland, the Polish government did provide potassium iodide to Polish children, and there is a marked decrease of thyroid abnormalities in Poland that could be ascribed to the radioactive iodine that was released in Chernobyl. But there's some research, for example, that apple pectate can reduce radioactive cesium in muscle, but again, these are still very experimental, and the most relevant protection is to prevent the exposure.
Yeah. Are you aware that our government just purchased a large quantity of these iodine pills?
What we are aware of is that in the aftermath of the 9/11 attack on New York and Washington, D.C., that Congress passed a Bioterrorism Protection Act of 2002, which made into public law that the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission was to establish the stockpiling of potassium iodide for prompt distribution out to populations that lived within 20 miles of every nuclear power plant in the United States. And that law was passed into effect in 2002, and today, 2014, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission has defied Congress in implementing that law. And the nuclear industry and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission have resisted stockpiling this thyroid protection medicine for children and adults around U.S. nuclear power stations. So, again, these are the kinds of conflicts that exist because the industry is just afraid of the publicity that would be generated if we were actually stockpiling potassium iodide around these 20-mile perimeters, and they just don't want the bad publicity, and so they've managed to lobby so intensely that they are able to defy the law of Congress.
Do you think it would be wise for people who live within these areas to purchase their own?
Yeah, I think it's potassium iodide is it's one protection. It's not complete. It only guards against iodine-131. It has no effect on cesium, radioactive strontium, any of these other radioactive elements that would come in the fallout. But radioactive iodine is a very fast-moving, very mobile isotope. It's like radioactivity on roller skates in the aftermath of an accident. It will be the first radioactive hazard to arrive, and so if you are part of an evacuating population, that first exposure will come as radioactive iodine. So it would be advisable that while you're sitting in that traffic jam waiting to get out of town, that you have protected your thyroid. But if you're, stuck, ultimately the exposures are going to come from the fallout that comes behind that fast-moving cloud.
So being in a house or in a vehicle or even having like thick clothing on, none of that is going to protect you. I mean, it'll protect you more than standing outside, but not completely.
Well, again, it depends on if you're looking to shelter in place or if you're looking to get out of Dodge.
Yeah, I'd be looking to get out of Dodge.
The concern is that you can't see it, taste it, smell it, feel it. You're not going to know.
So until you start having we have, there are hundreds of thousands of people now, 20, 30, 40 miles away from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The government has refused to support them in their in the evacuation, but they know that the outside is contaminated. They have Geiger counters that can show, when you go over by the window, the radioactivity is shining through the glass. The brick will give you some protection, but if there are families that are, they don't put the baby's crib next to the window anymore because they know that the child will get more exposure the closer to the interior wall and the closer to the window. So they put the baby's crib, more to the center of the house or room, away from, so that they get decreased exposure. But the government is not providing them for the incentive, for the assistance to evacuate. You have families that are breaking apart right now in divorce because the mothers want to get their children away from these contaminated areas, but the fathers who are employed, can't get reassigned. They get no support for if they choose to relocate. So, families are breaking up, families taking the children away while some stay. That's happening widespread now around Fukushima Daiichi. It is quite the dilemma, particularly in a country like Japan, which is already so crowded that you can't easily move around. You can't easily relocate, to find, reemployment. And so you have this, these conundrums that pit livelihood versus quality of life. And so, this is going to be true in, any aftermath of a nuclear accident. There are some protections that can reduce your exposure, getting out, getting away quicker rather than later. But you would think, like you said, having the iodine pills, if you purchase them yourself and have them on hand, so that you don't have to wait for someone to come and give them to you after the fact, you would think anyone who lives in the area of a plant, that this would be a mandatory thing for people that live around there to have on their shelf. Like I said, that's what the United States Congress concluded
when they passed the public
Right.
law
But no
in
one's
2002.
doing it.
But the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is not enforcing the law right now. So it has been mandated, but that mandate is being defied by the industry and its champions, even here in the United States. So by law, you as a citizen, if you live within 20 miles, you're supposed to be provided that protection for your thyroid, for your children's thyroid, but the law is being ignored.
Interesting. It's almost as though it goes to the theory of population reduction. They could care less whether we get sick and die.
I think it's more about they're protecting their public image without regard for the risks to public health and safety.
For those that don't know a lot about you, because we are coming up on our last 15 minutes of the show, why don't you give out some information of your websites and your work and how they can find out a little bit about you?
Well, the name of our organization, again, is Beyond Nuclear. You can go to our website at www.beyondnuclear.org, and you can find out how you can sign up to receive our weekly bulletin, which gives you the most current information about nuclear power, nuclear waste, and nuclear weapons. And it's a good way to keep track of the developments around Fukushima Daiichi, as well as the nuclear industry here in the United States. You can also give us a call at our office here in Tacoma Park, Maryland, at 301-270-2209. We're happy to take your call and answer any questions or take comments. We're a public advocate to basically address the ongoing and growing hazards from the atomic age.
What do they do with this nuclear waste? Are they burying it? And how much of it do we acquire?
Right now, there's close to about 72,000 metric tons of high-level nuclear waste. This is essentially the nuclear fuel after it runs its course through a reactor after 6 years of operation, approximately. It then is basically disused, and it must be put underwater for a minimum of 5 years before it can be possibly transferred into dry cask storage. Right now, there is no long-term management strategy for high-level nuclear waste. While they have been promising us for decades that there would be a long-term management strategy, principally, putting it underground in deep geological repositories. The only site that was actively under characterization for that plan was Yucca Mountain, Nevada, and what's been disclosed is that Yucca Mountain, which is just 90 miles from Las Vegas, is one of the more seismologically active areas of the United States, North America. The Yucca Mountain repository site is surrounded by young volcanoes, even to the point where volcanic ash has been found in some of the fault lines that run right through where they would bury 70,000 metric tons of nuclear waste. So if the best technology can only afford us a site that we already know to be seismologically active with volcanoes around it. I mean, that's more the work of science fiction than it is a legitimate science that looks to isolate some of the most hazardous material, fiendishly hazardous material that is, man-made. Right now there is a reevaluation of, what do you do with this stuff? But ultimately, the first and most responsible step is to stop making it.
Yeah.
And that, if you have any common sense and your toilet stops working, you don't use it until you fix it. And yet, you can't apply that simple logic to the hazardous material that's being commercially generated in the United States and around the world. Right now, there's about 250,000 metric tons of high-level nuclear waste around the world. But that's only just the irradiated fuel. Then, every link in the nuclear chain, beginning with uranium mining, you have this toxic legacy that's being just left unmanaged. With mining, it's these, mountains, I mean, literally mountains of uranium mine tailings that are just left open on the surface, leaching radioactive and heavy metal, by the way. Uranium, like lead and mercury, is toxic as a heavy metal as well as being radioactive. They're just left to off-gas radon, radium into the atmosphere, into the water, and, without regard for future generations. But ultimately, every link in this chain binds us to a hazardous future for populations that will get not 1 watt of benefit, but all of the toxic legacy.
Well, our children are in trouble if we don't do something about this, aren't they, Paul?
Our children's 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 children.
That's so sad. Well, that's why we have shows like this, so we can come out and tell the truth, because it seems like mainstream media it scoots around the issues, the truth.
I think that, one of the big concerns right now is there's a lot more uncertainty than there is what we know. And, we've got to take precautions. And we advocate for a precautionary principle that, where you have, an obvious threat, like radiation, which we know every little bit more you receive in exposure increases your risk to adverse health consequence, genetic mutation, birth defects. These are, this is the clinical evidence from radiation exposure. Even to the simple concept, if you're out in the sun too much, that cosmic radiation can give you an increased risk in skin cancer. But when you're ingesting that radioactivity to your bone marrow from man-made sources, these are the kinds of risks that we want to reduce in terms of a precautionary principle that will choose, particularly in our energy supply, our energy policy, the energy generators like the wind and solar that don't need emergency planning zones. that don't need shoot-to-kill enforcement to guard against, terrorism, that don't need national sacrifice areas for emergency planning zones or nuclear waste sites, that an energy supply that ultimately is not connected to the development of nuclear weapons. I mean, nuclear power fundamentally is the easiest way to building a bomb. You can, say that you're only in it for the peaceful atom, but ultimately that's the cover of a gentleman's agreement that can arrive at just walking away from a handshake, like what happened in North Korea. North Korea was originally a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, a gentleman's agreement, that they built the infrastructure for civilian use of nuclear power, and when they got the building block for the nuclear bomb, they used it, and they walked away from the agreement. And this is this is the nature. The peaceful atom was always a bomb, and it will never be otherwise.
You do have a question in the chat. Someone's asking, what do you know about USC 241 and 242? USC. I'm not, I don't know what that, I'm not sure what that is. I have not a clue what they're talking about. I thought you might.
I'm not familiar with that acronym.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much, Paul, for coming out and you spent 2 hours with us tonight, and I hope to have you back at a later date. You can update us with what's going on. Thank you so much for the information you've given us and the advice you've given us. I hope that everybody that lives around these plants do go out and get the iodine potassium pills and keep them on hand. And, bless you for all your work and speaking out, because I know it's not easy. When we stand up for what's right, we generally get under attack from the bad guys that are lining their pockets.
Okay. And that was Mr. Paul Gunter. I apologize for Ken Rohla not being here tonight. He must have had something happen. I haven't spoken with him, but I am going to get back in touch with him and try to rebook his show. We just kind of went out and grabbed this recording. This was recorded in February of last year, and I hope you all enjoyed the show. Join me again on next Wednesday for my holistic healing call, and also on Monday for Kathy's prayer call. And I want to thank you all. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show, and have a blessed weekend. And remember, Badbaby loves you.